When the Navy says we have 290 ships right now until Congress, actually there are about 100 Sealift, and these are completely unarmed ships. They carry sidearms and low caliber weapons, but there's not even a Sea Whiz defending these ships.
All players, low down, active, bullseye, 1327. Put tactical.
Lights on.
Okay, we're live. Jake, it's been a minute now that we're recording. We can talk about all the things we just talked about, but it's been a few episodes since we had you on for co-hosting duty, so welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're the one who came up with this idea. You said, hey, we should do an episode on the Marines, but not the U.S. Marine Corps, but the U.S. Merchant Marine. And I had two instant reactions to that. The first was, oh, I know what you're talking about. And then the next question was, actually, I don't know what I'm talking about. So yeah, let's do that. I need to get smart on this. And then the next thing you said is, I have the perfect guest. So I'm going to pass the intro to you because you're the one who came up with this idea.
I'm going to confess that my knowledge of the Merchant Marine is also quite limited. I was at a veterans cemetery about 8 years ago for a ceremony, and they had a big plaque on the wall with a seal from all the services. And one of the seals was a Merchant Marine seal, and I had no idea what the Merchant Marine was. And I'll confess again, I haven't really expanded my knowledge much beyond that in the last 10 years, other than reading the absolutely excellent content that our guest, John Conrad, puts out on the Merchant Marine. And I have learned a fair bit in the last couple of months. But John, thanks for coming on the show. It'd be great if you could introduce yourself and, let us know a little bit about what you do.
So excited to be here. Captain John Conrad, I'm a U.S. Merchant Mariner. Started off going to one of the maritime academies. So there's 6 state maritime academies, and then there's the Federal Maritime Academy, which is, just like Annapolis, Coast Guard Academy, West Point. There's a Merchant Marine Academy in Long Island, and then 6 state schools. Originally, I was going to go Navy, but I kind of fell in love with these large ships. And on the bridge of a Navy ship, you'll have 20, 30 guys. On the bridge of a merchant ship, it's just you and one AB or a lookout. And so that means you pretty much have to do everything yourself on these ships. And just the size of these ships are absolutely enormous. First ship was helping the Marines build pier units, kind of like they're doing in Gaza right now. And then I moved on tankers and worked my way up to a super tanker in Valdez, and, a 1,000-foot ship that's carrying 1 million barrels of oil. And, you're up there and 23 years old and in charge of the whole thing. One wrong turn and it's going up on the rocks.
That's like the size of an aircraft carrier, right?
Right. It's, and these ships have gotten bigger since. I also spent 1.5 years building ships in Korea, South Korea, and then there was a new container ship next to us that had 24,000 TUs, the container boxes. And it's 350 feet longer than an aircraft carrier. Aircraft carrier has 5,000 to 6,000 people, depending on the mission. And this ship only had 23 people on board. So,
oh my God,
that kind of gives you the scale of what's going on here. So that's one option. You can go fully commercial after the academy, or you can go Navy Reserves, where they'll pay most of your tuition if you agree to join the Navy Reserves. And they actually, because you're at sea so much, they waive the weekend a month. So you're only doing 2 weeks a year, learning how to coordinate with the Navy. Or you can go Military Sealift Command. So the Navy has its own merchant marine inside the Navy. They, all of the food and supplies and ammo for the aircraft carrier, that all comes on merchant ships. So the difference is a warship is USS, and the merchant crewed ships are USNS. So they operate for Military Sealift Command, and those ships are, kind of like in the Air Force airlift fleet, but it's a government-owned ship, government-operated ship. You're a government employee, but you are, not Navy, you are Merchant Marine.
if the stars align, we'll be releasing this right about the time that National Maritime Day, which I looked this up, is May 24th. So that is the annual day to celebrate merchant mariners. It's merchant marine, not merchant marines. So it's singular, not
Correct.
plural. John taught me that off camera before we started recording. Jake, you were late, so you didn't get that.
Yeah, I'm sure I screwed that up.
I don't know. You may or may not have. Okay, so we talked about what are the merchant marines. It's not entirely clear. Peacetime, wartime, in war, they can be attached to the Navy, but they're actually not assigned traditionally to the Department of Defense. Do you know how that relationship plays out in peacetime versus wartime, John?
Right. So there are two basic sides. There are those U.S.-owned, U.S. government, Navy-run USNS ships like the oilers that bring fuel out to the aircraft carriers. Those guys are wearing a uniform. They're civilian employees, but MSC has its own set of medals for the merchant mariners. There's big contention if they should be considered veterans or not because they're in combat right now in the Red Sea. You know, all of the Navy guys are getting combat medals. The merchant mariners aren't.
One of the things I came across, funny you mentioned that, and Jake, this may go back to the memorial that you were talking about earlier. During World War II, there was about 250,000 merchant mariners that were assigned to the U.S. military to do various things, mostly obviously transporting supplies and people. And they had almost 10,000 casualties, which is like when you look at per capita, one of the highest casualty rates per branch of service. And they didn't get any veteran recognition until like the late 80s.
I mean, this would have been the tip of the spear in the Battle of the Atlantic, right?
Right. The highest casualty rate of any service, almost any subservice except, areas of the submarine force and in the Pacific. It was amazing losses. And the Merchant Marine Academy is the only academy that can carry a battle standard because they lost 200 something cadets on board ships who were, not fully commissioned yet.
A quick shout out to a friend of mine, Otter View. So when we worked in the Pentagon together, his son was applying to the Merchant Marine Academy, and he would go up to Kings Point. I used to ask him, like, what the hell is that? Then he explained it to me. He's like, oh, it's there. The Merchant Marine Academy is up in New York and Long Island, right outside Queens, actually, I think. So that's actually the first time I ever heard of, like, they had their own academy. It's actually one of the 5 U.S. service academies, which is interesting. And then what I understand is when you attend the Merchant Marine Academy, you take an oath of office as a Navy reservist, and then you actually fall under the UCMJ while you're in your academy training, which is like, oh, it's a really interesting, hybrid structure.
If you go there, you're Navy Reserve, so you are UCMJ. And if you go to the state academies and the government pays your part of your tuition, your Navy Reserve and UCMJ. On the supply ships, if you go that side, the Sealift, you are subject to UCMJ when the admiral wants to be subject to the UCMJ, is how the law goes. So they say, no, they're civilians. We don't want to give them benefits and things, but at any time we can make them subject to the UCMJ. And then there are cutouts. So if there's a war, everyone gets in a combat zone, gets 1 medal, but you also get VA burial benefits. So my wife was a container ship officer. She went to Iraq war delivering munitions. It's usually the merchant ships, it's the Marines, then the merchant ships, and then the Army comes in because we carry all the supplies. So she was in one of the first waves.
Is your wife a captain as well?
She worked her way up to second mate, and then when she got her master's in teaching. So she's now an educator.
Okay, I thought that was going to set itself up for a really good joke, but it did not. So how'd you guys meet? If you're both merchant mariners.
We both went to the Maritime Academy in New York. Yeah.
Oh, nice. So you've been together a long, long time.
Yes.
Okay. So there's 3 tracks.
That was.
Now I'm going to get in trouble, huh? She's going to see that. I bet that eye roll was not about her. It was about me thinking like how old I am. But
it's all good. All good. All right. So John, you talked about, you dove a little bit into Military Sealift Command. So there's a ships and then there's a sailors, and we were talking about the sailors of the merchant marine and the mariners, but then the ships, like you said, they're USNS, and those are Military Sealift Command designated ships. So civilian crewed Navy ships. Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
Because of the personnel shortage in the Navy, they're starting to put merchant mariners even on USS ships. So you can find us on USS ships as well.
How many ships does the Military Sealift Command operate? It looked like it was kind of, the numbers were pretty wide ranging when I was looking them up.
That's part of the concern is when the Navy says we have 290 ships right now until Congress. Actually, I think it's about 100. I could be way off on there. Is supply ships. They're sealift, and these are completely unarmed ships. They carry sidearms and low caliber weapons, but so all these ships in the Red Sea, we are not obligated by any means to protect any of these ships that are going through unless they have a U.S. flag on the back. So these few U.S. flag commercial ships, most of them have to carry military goods when there's a problem. And in exchange, the military is obligated by law to protect those ships. So if you remember back to Captain Phillips, the movie with Tom Hanks and the Somali pirates, well, a lot of ships have been taken by pirates and we didn't do anything. And then they took a U.S. flagged U.S. merchant marine ship. And even though it was carrying commercial cargo, that's when all hell broke loose, where, we send in warships and Navy SEALs drop from the sky, and because that's a U.S. flagship. So it used to be the incentive why we had so many U.S. flagships in World War II is because everyone wanted the Navy protection. But fast forward to the early 2000s, and especially after piracy was over, the seas were safe. So everyone went to Liberia, Panama, Marshall Islands because they did not want that. They didn't need that U.S. Navy protection. It's cheaper to operate those flags. There are 50,000 merchant ships in the world. Out of that, China has like 5,000 or 6,000 of those. The United States only has 85 in international service. So
the ships that are subject to being taken over by the merchant marine in wartime, those are just the ships that are U.S. flagged. So you opt in to be U.S. flagged, you get U.S. Navy protection, but you are now subject to being requisitioned in a war. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, and that's not just us. If you're a Chinese flag ship, the China can take you in a war, right? The home flag. That's another reason most of them will flag in Panama, Marshall Islands, Liberia, because they know the ships aren't going to be taken in war.
It's also a tax haven, right?
That's the big one. I mean, it's all about the money.
Yeah. Trading,
and not just tax haven, but regulations. They have lower regulations. If you have a U.S. flag ship, you have to hire Americans. That's part of the law. If you're a Liberia doesn't care who you hire as long as they have the license. So the crewing costs are a lot less.
Is this all tied into the Jones Act?
I learned about this. I had a Jones Act potential issue. If you've ever taken a cruise anywhere, say you're like on the East Coast, like Upper East Coast, and then you like stop somewhere on the like Southern East Coast, there's issues because the point of origin and destination are both in the U.S. And there's all kinds of issues of like getting off and on the ship. And so if you missed your port, you can't just go to the next one. I was on a cruise that someone ran into that issue and they couldn't let them on, even though they're there because of the Jones Act. I was like, what is the Jones Act?
The Jones Act is strong. So in going back to World War I, we didn't have nearly enough ships. So we started building them in the beginning of the war and we ramped up production. But by the time we got those first ships out, the war was over. So Senator Wesley Jones says we need more U.S. flag ships. So what he said is if you go between two U.S. ports, and this really is between U.S. Puerto Rico, U.S. West Coast, and Alaska or Hawaii. The ship has to be built in the U.S., it has to be owned by Americans, and it has to be crewed by Americans. So that is really restrictive because American crews get paid a lot more, and you have to follow all the Coast Guard regulations and so forth. So these companies will do everything in their power to get around that. there's a famous story. They built like a 30-foot train in Canada. I don't know the full story, just so that they could put cargo on the train, put it back on the ship, and say, "Hey, it went to Canada."
I've seen the video. Of it. It's
You've
like
seen
a
it.
30-foot long train track. It's like, no kidding. They move it 30 feet and then they say it was transported to get around the Jones Act. Yep.
Right.
I've seen it. I'm going
Incredible.
to put it in I'm going to voice over this. It's showing in the video right now on YouTube. We'll put it in there.
So that's why cruise ships always go to a Caribbean island or Mexico on the West Coast. They always stop somewhere, sometimes just for an hour or two. That's to get around the Jones Act. And I don't like talking about very much because it's extremely controversial and both sides are very well funded. There's a huge anti-Jones Act lobby and there's a huge pro-Jones Act lobby. And if you just mention the Jones Act on Twitter, you're getting these sides, professional lobbyists and paid coming in to attack whichever side you're on.
That'll be good for engagement, Mike. We have to pick a side. I don't know. So what is the who is on the pro-Jones Act side? Is this mostly the domestic shipbuilding industry?
The shipbuilding industry has been the biggest proponent, and it's been strange because, at the end of the Reagan and then we had the peace dividend, there was a big push to get the shipyards, hey, build commercial ships now because we don't need this many Navy ships. And they hemmed and hawed and finally built a tanker and it went way over cost. And they said, this is too difficult. We're not doing this because for a commercial ship is very tight margins and you don't make a lot of money. You make money by volume. For building a Navy ship, historically, and things are changing, the delays and change orders could all be charged back to the government. So most of the shipyards said, we don't want to do this, but they didn't want to give up that protection in the Jones Act. So there were many years where they wanted to keep the legal protection, but they didn't want to build merchant ships. Say you own a merchant ship that's U.S. flagged. You paid 4 to 5 times the price and you built it. Well, the blue book value of that ship is 4 to 5 times, even if it's used the other ships. So they don't want to lose that protection because the book value and the value of their ships would go down and there would be, a competition on their routes. So that's who's pro-Jones Act. And most merchant mariners like me are pro-Jones Act because if we got rid of it tomorrow and didn't make changes, most merchant mariners would lose their jobs. And there aren't many of us left. And then the anti-Jones Act is the international money set. It's really the Cato Institute, the Libertarians, Heritage does some anti-Jones work, and it's really, there's a lot of funding from the Koch brothers and the business community.
I mean, it's only 85 ships or so that are U.S. flagged that this really applies to, right?
And I'm going to get in trouble. Like I said, I don't like talking about this, but there are fractions, and there's the problem. Everyone in the maritime industry has been starved. Every single, the shipbuilding, the Navy.
What are you talking about? Our shipyards are in fantastic condition right now.
They're in terrible condition. Everyone's been starved. Like the FAA, for example, has 45,000 employees at DOT. So Secretary Pete is our service secretary. He's the service secretary in charge of the Merchant Marine. And the FAA, even though it's not even a military organization, doesn't have an academy, it has over 40,000 employees. The Maritime Administration, which runs not just the Merchant Marine, but all the ports, all of the rivers, all the waterways in the country, they only have 800 employees and half of them work at the academy. So there are only like 300 people working on policy in this. So this is when we get a $1.2 trillion infrastructure stimulus. And it's like, wow, we got all this money. Well, we literally don't have the people to apply for those grants and money. So only it's less than 1% of that huge infrastructure is going to shipping, which is a shame because on both sides, on the left, ships emit 1/10 the carbon of trucks. And we have this beautiful river system. I mean, hopefully, if you remember, your listeners can bring up a map of the navigable rivers. It's enormous, and the waterways, and a lot of our waterways are protected in harbors. And that's where cargo used to be. But we now put all the subsidies into roads, and trucking's cheap. So now our roads are crowded, right? So the left is like, wow, this would be great. We can move the same amount of cargo for 1/10 the energy and 1/10 the carbon. And the right is like, wow, we really, the Navy needs help with shipbuilding. We need more of these logistic ships for the Navy. We need more shipbuilders and stuff. So it's a bipartisan issue, but it's just been decayed over so many decades and nobody cared.
Did you say that the Merchant Marines fall under the jurisdiction of the FAA? Is that what you said?
DOT. So they're
DOT, okay.
sister of FAA. So Secretary Pete is our service chief.
Okay, for Department of Transportation.
Right.
Okay.
Does Secretary Pete know that?
Yeah, does he know that?
He does. I've talked about it. He visited the Merchant Marine Academy once, but he's tweeted absolutely nothing. I mean, our merchant mariners are under live fire right now in the Red Sea, and he posted one tweet. That's all. There's no thank you. There are no medals that are being issued. There's nothing.
It sounds like a for a multitude of reasons, but compounding problems to like a generational workforce issue then, right? Doesn't get the visibility and awareness, doesn't get the appreciation, doesn't get the resources. Eventually just don't get the people, right?
Right. We have a huge manning crisis. The last Manning study was in 2017. It took me months convincing the Navy, and I'm talking to the Secretary of the Navy, and they're like, why can't we build ships? I'm like, you don't have a basic shipyard survey. So they're like surveys, like military people go into Boeing and all our aircraft manufacturers and look around and say, hey, they got this crane, they got this capacity, and they write a report. Well, the Maritime Administration has been so cut, and it's required by Congress every year. They haven't written a report since 2003. So we don't even know what our shipyard capabilities are. Like we have no idea.
So there's an annual report requirement that hasn't been done since 2003?
21 years.
You know, that's fascinating. When I obviously I follow the military hearings, and you'll see, you know, hundreds of report languages, you know, every year. And it's like within 90 days of this, within 30 days of that. And man, if they don't deliver a report on time, like you just get skewered in the next hearing, which actually just happened, like as we're recording this, like a week ago, about why the Air Force didn't deliver this force structure report that's a month late. It's like, really? Like, or actually it's a year late now, but to your point, like 20 something years late, 21 years late. Come on. You know, what is a jurisdiction like committee hearings, like oversight? What part of Congress oversees the Merchant Marines?
So we had our own Merchant Marine Committee in the Congress. It was Merchant Marine and Fisheries, and Newt Gingrich cut that out and merged us with Transportation and Infrastructure. So we still have hearings, and you can watch them on YouTube. No one shows up. No one's there. There's no one. The committee members are there, the infrastructure members, but some of them, most of them don't even show up for that. But there's no wider interest in Congress. Even the Red Sea, it was the top of the news. They had a full hearing on the Red Sea, and you know, we're getting ships getting shot at, huge inflationary pressures because of this. You know, the Middle East falling apart, and no one showed up. They just don't. And that's part of the reason I think, I can't speak for him, Secretary P doesn't mention it, because if he mentions it, he's going to be asked about that 20-year report. He's going to be asked, how many merchant mariners are we short? If there's a war and all the merchant mariners go to war to deliver goods, how many are going to show up? We have no idea because they haven't done a manpower survey in 2017. At that point, we were short 3,500 mariners. And
so, wait, you said you're 3,500, roughly, you think 3,500 mariners short. And earlier you said there's only like, you know, less than 50 mariners on it per ship.
They're only 20 to 25.
So it's about 140 ships if you do the math.
Yeah. Like, where are all the ships? Are there empty ships, or there's no ships with no people? So is it a people and ship problem, or is it a people problem?
So we have the ready reserve fleet. We have ancient ships. It's average age 46 years old that are just sitting there gathering rust, waiting for war to happen.
Where are these ships?
There are 3 ready reserve in the West Coast. They're in the Bay, Alameda. There's the Gulf Coast ready reserve, and then the St. James fleet. And then we have We have a few ships that are pre-positioned. So those are empty ships. They have to be ready within 10 days. So when we go to war, they have to sail within 10 days. They're not going to because they're too old. And then we have ships in Diego Garcia and Guam that are filled with Army gear. So there's battalions worth of Army gear already on the ship, the ammo, the MREs, the tanks, and they're just sitting in Guam and Diego Garcia.
All right. So I just looked it up. We built about 2,700 Liberty ships during World War II, about 5,500 ships total for merchant marine purposes. You said China has about 5,000 Chinese flagged ships. So the numbers are actually kind of interesting that they're right around what we built for fighting World War II today. And we have about 80. So if World War III kicked off tomorrow and we had to close the shipping gap, could we do it like they did it in Freedom's Forge? Could we build 2,700 Liberty II ships in the next 3 or 4 years?
I'm very pro-American. I very if we get our act together, we can do it. I'm very, a big technology guy, startup guy. I think American can do it. There will be a lag, one. And two is what they don't tell you is we don't have to. America always has and probably always will just arrest the ships, take the ships, the Chinese ships, and pull the Chinese flag off anyone in port or anyone we could capture, put an American flag on it, and use those for the military. The problem is that the Chinese crews on those ships, or the Filipino or the Indian or the Russian or the Ukrainian crews who are on those ships, they're not likely going to sail into Okinawa, which is under enemy fire, right? So the biggest problem is the workforce. And the biggest problem with the shipyards is the workforce too. We just don't have people who know how to, there aren't many ship captains. There aren't many shipyard workers, and there's very little in between right now.
Sounds like 21st century letters of marque might be necessary.
So you're saying if we did activate these people that don't exist, there's 3,500 there. I'm guessing the total workforce is something in like the 5,000 to 10,000 mariner range, something like that. So you're short, call it 3,000 people, which we don't know because we haven't done a manpower study. We'll assume that even if you could wave a magic wand and these people who don't exist magically showed up and reported to duty to go to these ships, then the ships themselves wouldn't work because there's no one really sustaining and maintaining them. Is that a good readback?
That's perfect. You nailed it.
That's terrible. That's terrible.
All right. A little bit more doom and gloom. From following you on Twitter, John, it also sounds like we have divested ourselves of non-cargo carrying capabilities as well. And specifically, I'm thinking about salvage capabilities and things of that nature. Can you explain a little bit about sort of the other things that we've lost in the last couple of years as we've divested our maritime capabilities?
So there's Military Sealift Command ships that bring mostly tankers and ammo ships, right? That are bringing supplies out to the carrier group and to the forward operating bases and so forth. But there are also a lot of working ships. We have a radar tracking ship for ICBM missiles. We have a salvage ship that has all pumps and firefighting capabilities. We have an ocean tug to go if a Navy ship gets hit to pull it out. All of these working ships that we used to have, we've gone down to be, in most cases, we only have one. So we used to have dozens of these salvage. That's the most important. If a ship gets hit, can we rescue it? Because there's sailors who are drowning right now. Can we drag that back to port and river?
It was like the big ship that carried the USS Cole, right?
Well, that was a commercial ship.
Oh, okay.
And that's an interesting one. So we built two of those, and the Marine Corps wanted them. They wanted to put LCACs on it, just like those. And we tested the LCACs, and it didn't work. So now the Navy's getting rid of it, and it's like, come on, guys! Like you can literally put a ship on the ship. Even now, when we're in this problem, they just continue to divest it. So the salvage ships, they went down and they go, well, we'll have three. We'll have one East Coast, one West Coast, and we'll have one over in Japan. And they've gone down to one. And some areas we have zero. So every commercial port in the country has massive fireboats. You know, these fireboats that could fill 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of water in 1 second. And the Bonhomme Richard, it's a Marine Corps carrier, a helicopter aircraft carrier, caught fire in San Francisco, and we don't have a single fireboat in San Francisco. So someone in the Navy goes, well, we need fireboats, so let's call a fireboat. So they called the police and said, you have fireboats. And the police go, yeah, we got fireboats. We'll send them right now. So Navy waits 20 minutes for the police fireboat. Well, these are tiny little fireboats put out little dock fires. And it's a comical thing. And then they're panicked. They're like, what else can we do? And the tugboat guys are like, what can come in? And they came in and they provided some cooling. But a dedicated fireboat has firefighters on board who know firefighting. They know how to talk to the Navy. They know how to talk to the shore side. They can be that command and control structure. They have all the adapters so that fireboat can connect into the hose system of the ship and push extra power in. They have the radios to connect to the hose team. Afterwards, I wrote a big article, and I'm like, the Navy needs fireboats. And the Congress actually came and they said, hey, Secretary of the Navy, G. Captain here says we need fireboats. What do you think? And they go, no, we have these tugboats. Yeah, we have the tugboats, but the tugboats have a working job, and you guys aren't providing them training, and they don't have this special equipment, and they don't have the firefighting radios. So the Navy keeps looking for excuses to say, well, we got this covered, we got that covered, we got this covered. And kind of they do, and this gets to Baltimore. We're clear on this Baltimore thing, but our cranes are tiny. If this happened in the Netherlands or happened in China, that bridge would have been completely cleared in 2 to 3 weeks. And you look at the news, and the news says, hey, we're bringing the largest crane in the United States into Baltimore, and everyone claps and they go, this is great. Well, the biggest crane on the whole entire East Coast lifts 1,000 tons. What they're not saying in this news, and the media's gotten so controlled in the military, what they're not saying is our friends in the Netherlands have a 14,000 ton crane. So these underwater divers, they have to cut into smaller pieces. That's what's taking so much time. And then you go and you're like, okay, we know these bridges are vulnerable. We know half the fleet's in San Diego behind the bridge. We know all these other bridges. So are we gonna buy or rent or charter a large crane? So if it happens during war, so if there's sabotage, there's no forward progress on this. There are no lessons learned.
So salvage, cranes, firefighting, all of the support ships, oilers and ammo seem like they got that pretty well covered, unless there's a surge.
Oilers is our biggest constraint. We're 100 oilers short is what the vice president of Maersk Shipping said.
I was looking for the good news here, and you just ruined it. So more bad news. If I've got about not nearly as much as you, John. I've got about 11 months of sea time across a few different ships.
It's awesome.
USS and USNS. I was on the Curtis Wright way back when.
There's another one, the tender. That was an aviation tender. We still have it. It's ancient. It's not going to do much, but we used to have subtenders, destroyer, the Curtis Wright. Amazing ship.
Yeah, it's a great ship. Spent about a month, maybe 5 weeks on it. But one of the things that's unique when you see the USNS designated ships is the smokestack. So they have that unique stripes. It's black, blue, and yellow in some order, right? If I remember right. But when you see that out sea with a Navy ship, those ships only go out about 10-ish days, 20 days before they need to go find a merchant marine or a military sealift command vessel to get resupplied, whether it's they need food or they need fuel. And that nuance, unless you've been a part of it and lived on a ship and see like how often these merchant marines come by and keep them sustained, without the merchant marine, there is no Navy, right? Like there is no sea power.
There's no reach. There's no expeditionary. We can protect our own coast, but we can't head out to the Red Sea away from our bases. Correct. And the Navy's starting to understand that, and they're pushing for it. But actually, in war, the number one consumer of merchant marine goods by far, it's not even close, is the Air Force, because they need all that fuel brought to a forward air base and all those heavy bombs that they're dropping. And the Air Force goes, well, that's a Navy problem. And then all those Army tanks, those prepositioned ships, there's a brigade of Army supplies sitting there, but everyone pushes it to the Navy, and then the Navy says, well, we're behind on warships, so we're gonna build those.
So the biggest customer is of the Merchant Marine Force, basically, is the Air Force?
Right.
I would not have guessed that.
The invention that has lifted more people out of poverty worldwide in the history of the world is the shipping container. It's everywhere now. It was invented by a truck driver. The story is, he was bringing his truck on and he said, wow, if someone could just lift the box off my truck and put it on the ship, this would make everything. And that's the story everyone's told. But what they don't realize is we had Connex boxes. You're in the military, you know what a Connex box is. We had Connex boxes in World War II. We actually, 100 years before that, the British were moving boxes onto canals. But the problem was, it's expensive. Those huge cranes, those huge ships are expensive, and no one wanted to put all that money in to test it. And what happened is the Vietnam War, we were dropping so many bombs and using so much fuel that all of the merchant ships, and this is back when we still had the ghost ships from World War II, we activated them all, and there was a huge line of ships, and they were all Air Force. And the Marines came to the Navy, and they say, we can't get our small ammo and our small weapons. Can you prioritize us here? Can you get us in fast? Because we're part of the Navy. So the Navy went and they found out the Army is technically in charge of all this. And it went nowhere. The Air Force is like, we need our bombs. And they were holding up, the huge congestion in Vietnam. So the Navy found this guy, Malcolm McLean. He's go, I got this box. So we built a huge, it was the biggest military construction project, I think, up to that point, Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam. And we did a huge one in Oakland. And we took a massive ships, started moving these containers. The problem went away overnight, but it was all the Air Force. And Sal Mercogliano, I actually had the book right here. My friend, he's on it. 4th Armored Defense, I randomly have this, talks all about that. So then every shipping company in the world said, hey, it works. It works at scale. They always know it worked, but they didn't know it worked at scale. So that was a military invention. And it was because those Air Force bombs take a lot of space.
Yeah. And they're really, really heavy. So airlift is generally not scalable. We talked about Captain Phillips. There's 3 famous merchant mariners that I came across doing some research. The first one you found, Captain Phillips, true story. Not that it was Tom Hanks playing the guy, who was true story. The other one, speaking of Vietnam War, Paul Singer from Orange County Choppers, that reality show. He's always screaming and throwing things with the son. He was a merchant mariner during the Vietnam War.
Right.
And then the last one, the most famous merchant mariner in history, the most famous that everyone, whether you know anything about the merchant marine or not. Jake, do you know who the most famous one is?
I'm going to say John Paul Jones. I don't know if that's going to be right.
Ooh,
he was,
but I don't think the average American would recognize that name. Besides, like, that's an old guy and he's probably famous for something, father of the Navy kind of thing. Popeye the Sailor Man, the most famous merchant mariner.
Popeye.
Yes, Popeye the Sailor Man.
I was going to go with Archie Bunker.
Oh yeah, Archie Bunker. But all this time, I don't know why, all this time I thought Popeye was in the Navy or in the Coast Guard.
I didn't even know that. It's a good find.
And fun fact, Popeye the Sailor Man, that was a cartoon modeled after a real person. And if you've seen the picture of this guy, his name is Frank Rocky Fiegel, also merchant mariner. So there you go. Most famous one. All right. So John, we're getting a little short on time. You're spitting fire, a lot of bad stuff. What makes you hopeful?
You guys called me to do this. It's a change. Like I said, our biggest enemy was apathy. People are interested. We're making missteps. We don't know what happened. There isn't enough money, but the public's awake now. We're past the apathy.
Yeah, awareness is definitely a good first step. But John, I want to give you the opportunity. I imagine you got to have some good sea stories. Can't see for a long time. You mind sharing a sea story with us before we wrap up?
The richest man in the world pointed a 3-inch gun at me and threatened to shoot once.
All right, now, that's the intro. Tell me the rest of the story.
Yeah.
Richest man in the world pointed a 3-inch gun right at me and threatened to shoot. And so I was on a drill ship in Borneo, and we were drilling for oil and under shell contract. And Shell said, "Hey, why don't you go look for oil over there?" And I looked at the chart, and I was like, "That looks like it's in front of Brunei." And they're like, "No, that's Malaysian waters." I'm like, "You sure? Kind of looks like Brunei." And they're like, "It's Malaysian waters." So, we bring the ship over there. And, people think that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are the richest man in the world. They're nowhere even close. I mean, this guy's got 10 billion barrels of oil under his thing that isn't even up. So it's not even in accounting, but he can bring it up and it's worth $60 a barrel each. So an unbelievable wealth. So the Sultan of Brunei, they bring the warships and they get angry, but we don't do anything. And then Shell goes and they decide, I don't know if you've seen The Simpsons, the directional drilling. So we were drilling down and then they decide to drill sideways. So they're right on the board and they decide to drill sideways. And I'm like, guys, they're going to get mad. So you got to hire specialists. Everything is like the directional drilling specialist. So it's like, maybe we bring them on a helicopter through India and we get a boat so they don't see. And Shell goes, no, it's fine. No one's going to see him if we just land him in the airport. So I go to the airport to pick him up. And here they come and they got I won't say the name, but big jackets with Bob's Directional Drilling on it and a picture of them just walking through the airport. So I'm like, oh my God, we bring them out to the ship. They set up and then the Sultan of Brunei comes out on his biggest Navy ship and is yelling at me over the speaker. We're gonna shoot you. I won't go to the whole detail, but he was rather upset. And then people go, he pointed a 3-inch gun at you. That's tiny, John. Like, were you even scared? How was he gonna aim a 3-inch gun up at the ship? I'm like, naval guns are by bullet diameter. So this is a gun with a 3-inch wide bullet he was pointing.
When you said 3-inch gun, I thought you meant in your face, like a little pepper box, Old West style or Dillinger, right?
Jake, we've been talking about maritime stuff for like 45 minutes, and that's the first thing you thought of when he said 3-inch guns was like, no, it's not it can't be a naval gun. It's got to be a handgun. Really? That's the first thing you thought of. Someday I will figure out what the G and G Captain stands for. But until then, if people are interested in what John's doing, head over to G Captain on the website. It'll be in the show notes. Check out his newsletter.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, that's it. Till next time, we'll see ya.